All right, it has started.
Awesome. I'm going to call this meeting of the Finance and Facilities Committee of the Waukesha Board of Education to order. The first item of business is the verification that the meeting was properly posted.
Yes, it was.
Excellent. Second, general business is opportunities for citizens to speak. Can we tell if anybody's watching?
Nobody's on.
Okay, nobody's on. Okay. Alrighty. Moving on to our action items. The first action item is the approval of minutes from the April 2020 meeting.
I'll move to approve the minutes.
There you go. Awesome.
As amended.
Sorry, who was that?
That was Corey.
What was the amendment?
I believe we were sent an updated minutes via email, so what I have in my packet is not the correct, unless I'm looking at the wrong committee.
Oh, Diane, you're muted. Diane. All right, there you go, Diane.
All right, thank you. Those minutes were for the meeting on Wednesday, for the school board, the full school board meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry, I read it too quickly.
Yeah. But I'll second your motion without an amendment. Without
thank you.
amending.
Thank you.
I was afraid to second it because I didn't know what the amendment was.
I didn't know either.
Without an amendment.
I was waiting for Jess to tell us.
I was nervous because I didn't know what it was.
Sorry about that.
Alrighty. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. You're good, right? You're good with that, Corey, right?
Yes, sorry.
Alrighty. So next action item up is the approval of the vouchers. Did we have any questions?
We did have some questions this month, and I did send an email because some of them got a little long and complicated. So I did send an email to everybody with a copy of the document, but I can quickly go through them. So voucher number 334708 for Vendor Max for $1,380. The question was, can you give us a feel on how this lead process works? How many leads did we receive? Plus, please give us an update on year-to-date spending for eAchieve advertising. So Vendor Max is the that we use for lead qualification, and what people call in. Vendor Max fields the call with some generic questions to try to make sure that these people are within the school age children and are looking to enroll, and then they determine based on the answer to those questions whether the lead is qualified. And we have statistics for the last 5 months. In December, there were 158 leads that went through Vendor Max, with 73 of them being determined as qualified. January was 281 leads with 103 qualified. February, 245 leads with 92 qualified. March, 286 leads with 115 qualified. And April, 203 with 74 qualified. And we have spent on total eAchieve advertising for 1920. We've spent $254,372, but we average around $397,000 a year. So this is the time of year when we're spending a little heavier in eAchieve advertising. So I expect that might still go up. On eAchieve pays Vendor Max $15 per qualified lead. It's a month-to-month contract, and we can drop it at any point in time or suspend the service whenever. Any questions on that? There's more detail.
I appreciate that information, Sherry. It's obviously critical for us to keep enrollment up in eAchieve, and it'll be interesting to see where we go this year with that. In terms of, will we potentially have an opportunity to increase the number of students, just given the current situation with COVID-19 and how some schools are handling virtual learning environments. So, there may be an increase in eAchieve if there are parents looking for another option. So I'm wondering if, I think you had said we have about 50,000 left in the budget. Is that right? If we budgeted the same as previous years?
Previous years, there's probably closer to 150,000. I think they budget about 400,000, but I would have to double check that.
So it looks like we're in a position though, if we did want to, push it a little bit this summer, we would have room in the budget to do so. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, actually,
1920 budget, but anything starting after July would go into the 2021.
Joe,
Oh, sorry.
Joe Cook met with EHE because we were having the same thought process. They did a big spend. If you remember, they wanted to get in before the DNC advertising and all that. Well, that happened right during the pandemic. So we have them looking into another push before open enrollment, and then potentially another push depending on what the opening of school looks like in the fall. Another push in August, and might even consider bumping their budget slightly to make that happen, because there's a school of thought certainly that maybe there's more to be had this year than other years. So
Yeah, I think there is a possibility for an opportunity in this summer. So, but nothing's for sure, right, these days. But it could be there. So thank you for those numbers, Sherry.
You're welcome. Okay, the second question was for voucher 334721 for student, $14,833. This was for the Marsh homeless transportation. And the question was, please remind me of the federal government definition of homeless. How many homeless students do we have, and how does this service work? Bus, car, etc., and the total cost for the year. So I'm going to read the exact definition from EPI of the homeless. It's because it's governed by the McKinney-Vento Act, and so it defines homeless children and youths as those who lack a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. The law provides several examples of situations that meet the definition, and they include sharing housing due to a loss of housing, economic hardship, or similar reason, living in hotels, motels, trailer parks, or campgrounds due to a lack of alternative adequate housing, living in emergency or transitional shelters, abandoned in hospitals, living in a public or private place not designated for or normally used as a regular sleeping accommodation for human beings, living in cars, parks, public spaces, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus or train stations or similar places, and or living in one of the circumstances and are migratory. So when we have counselors, we have homeless liaison counselors in the schools, and when they deem a student to be homeless and in a temporary living situation, if the student can no longer go to their resident district, we have to provide, the resident district and the district that they're in have to provide transportation to their original resident district, because it's determined that it's incredibly disruptive for students that are homeless, are already struggling to have this disruption and having to go to a different school district. And when that happens, we work with the other district, everybody agrees, and we split the cost 50-50 between the two districts. And currently, we have 3 different main methods that we provide transportation. One is for student on bus routes. The second is Go Kid Go, a private transportation firm, and then gas cards for parents that have the ability to actually transport their children. Right now, by far, we use First Student and Go Kid Go the most. And in fact, I don't believe we've had any gas cards this year. And First Student, so it's looked at and it's determined what's the most economical way to transport the student. And it's usually First Student. But if it's way out of a route or there's no other students in that area, then we can contract with Go Kid Go for that particular student. As far as the numbers go, through March, I apologize. Do you hear the washer in the background? Or Not coming through, because I apologize if you do. Okay,
Now
thank
we're gonna
you.
listen for it though.
It suddenly started going very loudly, and I live in a little apartment. The washing machine, apparently. Apologize. Anyways, so through March, we had spent $285,454 on homeless transportation. Now, keep in mind, for half of that, and we bill back the other districts for the other half. In 1920, we spent overall $452,000 on homeless transportation, again, absorbing 50% of that. And in 1718, it was $319,000. Half of that was ours. As we ended the in school, on March 13th, we were transporting 31 students deemed as homeless, 20 of them through First Student and 11 of them through Go Kid Go. And again, we use whatever is the most economical method when a student is determined homeless to get them to their school.
Mr. Como.
Thank you, Patrick. Real quick, Sherry, well, obviously this has changed due to COVID-19. We're not transporting any homeless students. But I'm wondering if we're planning on maybe a spike on that when things change. I don't know if you guys have had a discussion on that, just like there is an opportunity potentially to maybe increase eAchieve enrollment. I'm wondering if there's going to be some, major impact on homeless students here.
We haven't had that discussion, but I think that's probably a good call with the financial situation a lot of families are going to be in. I think when we do go back into session, there's a potential for that. Joe Cook, I don't know, have you had any conversations?
We've had quite a few conversations around what this is going to mean when we do come back. We are preparing ourselves for an increased number of students who are homeless. One of the steps that we have implemented, though, within this transportation piece is the in the best interest determination for the student. You see the dollars associated with transportation. Some of the students will come back and forth from school districts like New Berlin, which is nearby. Other students have hour-plus long routes through the Milwaukee city of Milwaukee. Some kids, they request, to come up near West Bend. So when we get into those best interest determinations, we are monitoring that. We'll make sure that our staff is prepared to have that conversation next year as we prepare for the school year, just depending on where people have been displaced to.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions on that? No? Anything else?
There's a couple more questions.
Okay, awesome.
There were a list of vouchers that were paid to first student, and the question was, are these expenses for student activities prior to COVID-19? And the answer is yes. They were all field trips that took place while we were still in a non-virtual learning mode. For students, not the quickest in billing us, so they came in, and we might even still have a few more trickling in, but that's exactly what all of these vouchers or payments were for, was for field trips. Any questions on that?
Mr. Como?
No, that was just a thumbs up.
Okay, all righty.
I'm good.
Okay, then the next question was referring to the Wisconnet payments, and said, remind me the annual cost for this service. I think we have a second vendor for internet access, correct? Who is that, and the annual cost with this vendor too? Wisconnet cost is for the district is $12,060 per year. I haven't gotten a response yet on the other vendor, so I'll follow up with an email when I get information from technology on what the other vendor is, and then I can look up the payments. But I didn't know off the top of my head what those were. So, okay. All right. If there's no questions on that, then I will go to the last question, which was they had noted that we had a payment to Aramark for $246,549, and they were wondering how the food service delivery is doing with the free meals that we're providing at 7 sites. And it's going well. We're serving about 937 students daily. Those students are getting both a breakfast and a lunch every day. They come at between noon and 1, and they get lunch for that day and breakfast for the next day. And then at 4 of the sites that were already operating the after-school snack program, those students are getting an additional snack put in their bag. I have on the sheet, I have a breakdown of the average of how many who's going to each school, but you can, unless you really want me to go through that, you can look at that on the one that I emailed you. But just to put that in perspective, on an average day while we're in session, non-virtual session, we serve 4,300 lunches and 1,200 breakfasts. So we're serving about 22% of the lunches we would normally serve, but yet 78% of the breakfasts that we would normally. Right now, there's several other organizations providing free meals to families, the Hope Center being one of them. And so that takes away a little bit of our meal service because they have other options at this point. Any questions on that?
Thank you.
Then that's it. That's the last of the questions.
All righty. Are there any other questions for Sherry about the vouchers?
No.
All righty, then I'll be looking for a motion for approval of the vouchers. Ms. Reincheck, there you go.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Corey. Any other discussion on the approval of the vouchers?
No.
All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? 5-0. Thank you. Moving on to discussion information items. The first discussion information item is the monthly budget report.
Sorry, I muted it. I didn't realize it was going up. Okay.
You are up.
Yep, I am. Okay. So just to kind of go through some of this month, I just mainly tried to focus on some of the areas that we're going to see more immediate impact this year with the COVID-19 things. And obviously next year there'll be more impact, but just wanted to highlight some of them. So starting with the revenues in the local sources, our main source was our April tax payment. We've collected 76.53% of our taxes in April compared to 79% last year. There was a, counties were given the opportunity to pass a resolution that would allow late payments or to waive the late payment fees on taxes. And if they did that, it would mean that we might not get we get our final tax payment in August normally. And if the county passed that resolution, then we might have our cash flow delayed till September because some of the payment might not come until September. The County of Waukesha has decided not to pass that resolution. So we're expecting our tax payments to be in August as normal. So that's a good thing because it doesn't interrupt our cash flow. Some of the areas of concern that we have as moving into the fiscal year, student fees and textbook fees and interest. The interest has just tanked. So we're not going to meet our budget revenue for interest. And we expect that some of the families will be paying their student fees late. So that we eventually should recover, but probably not in this fiscal year. So all 3 of those items are probably not going to come into budget where we expect to be. That said, our open enrollment as it stands right now, and I really don't expect it to change much with the way we're operating, we do have, again, more open enrollment in than we have out above our budget. So we have a little bit of surplus that's going to help offset the shortfall. Any questions on that before I move on to the next part? Okay.
No,
Aaron,
everybody's good.
Okay. Interdistrict sources and immediate sources. All we received in there was Carl Perkins grant payment and e-Achieve tuition payments. State sources, we did receive $671,000 in common school funds in April, but that also included an additional $80,000 disbursement that we were given for supplemental because of the pandemic. So all the libraries were given extra money. It does have to go to the same types of activities that they would normally have to do with common school funds, and they can carry it over into next year if they want to. So that was nice, a little extra help for the libraries. Federal sources basically were grant payments for Titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. With the grant payments, we don't spend all our grant money. It's all we can carry it all over. For the grants, the title grants that had limits on carryover, those are being waived because of the situation. So any unspent title money will be carried over into next year. Other revenue, basically insurance payments that included a final payment for the Summit View flooding and a reimbursement for a claim from South High School. And overall, we've collected 69% of our general revenue compared to 69% last year. So we're pretty good. We're, with the exception of some of the local things that I mentioned earlier. Okay, expenditures, salaries and benefits. We're starting to show a little bit of a decline because of the furloughs, and some of it's due to the furloughs. We're coming in at 70% of our budget compared to about 72% last year. It doesn't look like a big difference when we talk percentages, but keeping in mind how much that budget is, it means that right now we're looking at potentially 1.2 million under budget if it continues to trend that way. Benefits are 71% versus 74%, which again, mainly with the furloughed employees. Purchase services, a largest spend was for pupil transportation. Right now, we've totally paid all of the main transportation bills through March. The only thing we would have is the final contract settlement. And I think we're still working on that. Is that correct, Darren?
Yeah.
Okay. There may be a few field trips trickling in, but otherwise we are all caught up with our transportation bills. So non-capital objects, our main sources were supplies and non-capital equipment. Some of large drop in, we expect to see a large supply spending next month because we start ordering as many supplies, but keeping in mind that the sites do have carryover. So anything that we would deem as savings on that end would just be carrying over so that they could have it next year. So not really a big savings in expenditures there. And then another main expenditure was the Milwaukee PC, which is always the e-Achieve technology. Capital objects, not much right now, but assuming the floodgates are going to start to open on that with all the referendum projects and things we have going on now. Debt retirement, we had no general fund debt, so nothing to retire. Insurance and judgments, again, no big activity. We will see starting next month a rather large rise in unemployment benefit payments. So we're working on figuring out what that total is going to be. We are going to go back and charge back any special ed aids to the special education budget versus before we just put all of our unemployment into the general fund, but we are allowed to charge it back. So we're going to charge it back because it will help offset some of the lack of spending in Fund 27 at this point.
And we have to hit certain thresholds on that for the grants. So there's a reason why we want to move those dollars in there. Sherry, what's the term I'm looking for? Maintenance of effort.
MOE, yep, maintenance of effort.
To help us hit those thresholds that are required.
Yeah, if we don't make our maintenance of effort, and right now, usually there's certain things that'll allow exceptions into meeting it, and right now, the federal government does not consider COVID-19 an exception for next year. They would have to have some law changes in order for that to happen. That could still happen, but right now we're operating under the assumption that we need to try to do everything we can to meet our MOE. So any expenditures that we can, we're funneling to Fund 27. Let's see. Transfers, we did have a transfer to Fund 38, and that was to cover the energy efficiency part of our debt payment that we made in March. Other objects, just a refund on we had to pay for delinquent property taxes, $22,000. It's something we pay every year, and then it gets built back into our tax levy for the next year. Overall, we've spent 57.84% of our general budget, and last year at this time we were at 58. So the spending is pretty close, but there's things like I said, expect to ramp down, and other things that'll ramp up a little bit because of all the projects going on. Questions on the general fund before I move to Fund 27?
Nope.
I'll move on. Our only source of funding in April for Fund 27 was our Medicaid payments of $108,000. Medicaid payments are going to be impacted because without providing services to the students, we're not going to have claims to make. So, and let me rephrase that. We're still providing services. It's just that you can't claim the services in the virtual mode, is my understanding. So, it isn't that we're not, we're providing everything we can virtually. It's just that they're not claimable. Salaries and benefits, same situation as Fund 10 because the special education aids. And so we're monitoring that and watching where we're going to have savings. But along with that becomes this meeting the MOE because we don't have the expenditures there. Purchase services, again, that was just mainly transportation and then tuition for the other schools payments. Minimal spending in non-capital objects, no capital object spending, no insurance, but like I said, we'll start to see next month unemployment. Basically 70.83% of our budget compared to 70.69 last year. We'll start to see more changes in May because we've been paying bills from back in March. Moving on to Fund 43, interest was the only thing. Interest is starting to tank all over. The money that our Fund 43 money is mainly over in the EMA, the WISC account, and that has been our highest interest this month. So that's a good thing that the money's over there. Expenditures, we've been able to ramp up the renovation projects. So this will, moving forward, I'll expect to start seeing more expenses than we've had right now. Any questions on that part of the report? So then I'm going to move on to we talked about taxes already. So I'm just going to move on to our insurance. And the really only thing to talk about with the health insurance and dental, both of them are under the same situation. With most of the medical facilities cutting out appointments, cutting out things that people would normally be doing, we're having a savings on the insurance bills. But as we all know, once the floodgate opens, that's going to happen too. They're going to start going back to the doctor and that money will be spent. So what we're watching right now though is at year end, you can only carry over your incurred but not reported claims, but we expect that we're going to have a lot more claims toward the end of summer. So we're working with our auditors to find out how do we classify that, because they might not technically be considered incurred but not reported by the end of the year, but we'll be expecting them to ramp up again next year, and we don't want to be short, because right now at the end of April, our reserve was at $2.4 million, which is pretty hefty. I think that's the highest I've ever seen it go. And the dental is pretty much the same way. Most dental offices aren't doing anything but emergencies, and so we haven't had high claim volume, but it will start to ramp up a bit. Any questions on that? Comments? Otherwise, I'm done.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any questions for Sherry before we move on? All righty, thank you very much, Sherry. The next discussion information item is the 2020-2021 budget development.
Yeah, we touched on some of the issues out there. Mainly, I guess I should start out by saying it's hard to guesstimate in areas like transportation what it's going to look like, staffing. You know, are we going to be running fully on site? Is it going to be a blend? Is it going to be all virtual? So we're kind of in a holding pattern right now with the full development of a budget for next year, because I don't think it's going to be, you know, just simply rolling forward what we've done in the past, adding a % here or there. Not that it's ever that simple, but I think you get the point I'm trying to make. So I'm not one generally to run a bunch of scenarios, because you can watch our neighboring districts board meetings if you want to see 20 different scenarios run on what our financial outlook is. And all of those outlooks will be wrong when it's all said and done. But I thought I should give you some idea of scope of what could happen. And there's a lot of questions out there with all questions out there with the federal stimulus money right now. Whether the state will come back with a budget repair bill, what's the timing of that? Does it impact next school year or not? So issues like that, we just are going to have to be kind of in a holding pattern. So our strategy and development of budget is to save as many dollars as we can this year and provide the board as much flexibility next year as possible. But in running the projections that we'll go through in a minute here, if it happens in simply reducing our revenue limit, the real impact won't be felt next year. It'll be felt the following year. And I'll kind of walk you through why that's the case. So if you go to, there's some reading in here from the Legislative Fiscal Bureau and the CBO, and it's all doom and gloom stuff. But I think you should see what I'm seeing, and you don't have to search too hard to find other things saying roughly the same things. But I thought I'd give you a state and a federal level outlook. Obviously, with the slowing of the economy, tax revenues have slowed right along with that, with public education being the most significant cost to the state. I struggle to find a scenario where we're not part of the fiscal solution in terms of funding. So what I did, and if you want to actually break up your packet, there's on page 12 and 16. You want to rip those 2 pages apart, and I'll show you what I'm seeing in the revenue limit projection. And the reason I'm only talking about that is this drives about 85% of our revenue. And the rest of the things, fees and all those things, tend to be pretty steady and don't move a whole lot. But the change here could be big. And I'm also going to touch on summer school quickly. So I ran 2 scenarios. One status quo, meaning the pandemic never occurred. We're going to run a full summer school program this year. Current legislation will go on into next year, meaning would get, if you look about a third of the way down, there's a yellow box with $179 per pupil. That's in current legislation, so we would get $179 more in revenue authority for every resident kid we have. And then I just casted that forward into the green columns, which is 21, 22, and fiscal year 22, 23. Again, status quo, we would have a revenue limit of $129 million. But even under current legislation, with the assumption that we would have ran all of our programs the way we have, our revenue is pretty flat. We'd be looking at about $400,000 in revenue growth heading into next year, which sounds like a lot of money, but when your calculation is nearly $130 million, it's on a percentage basis, just isn't much growth. And then the other limit, which is page 12 and has scenario number 1 written on it. Should also add that I factored in a drop of 1.5% resident enrollment based on the enrollment projection I shared with FNF, I think 2 months ago now. But if you go back to that yellow box that had 179 in the last scenario, and I have 0 in there. If the state's going to balance their budget, and public education is part of that answer, they pay 2/3 of all costs through the state equalization aid. They have done in the past just cut aid, and our local tax levy goes through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get into the taxation part of this. This is really just a conversation of, can we pay our bills? We can hammer out where those dollars are coming from later on. But if they do that and they don't want taxes to go through the roof, they would lower our revenue limit to offset the drop in aid, and our taxes would stay, in theory, relatively flat or the same. The only other thing that's different in scenario number 1 is I assume that only 50% of the summer school participation as opposed to last year. I have no idea what that number should be. We've never run an all virtual summer school program. I don't think we even have the course catalog fully identified yet, but I thought I should factor that in. If you look at the number at the bottom, on both pages, the 129.3 in the yellow box, because of those exemptions that we get in next year's budget, I'm not sure we'll feel much impact. Because if you look just below the left-hand column in the middle of the page is a line called Hold Harmless. We would enter or receive an exemption of $2.3 million. That's a 1-year coupon for extra revenue limit authority. The lines that are the boxes you really need to look at in running these scenarios is the first green column. In the status quo revenue limit calculation, we have revenue limit authority of $128,712,000. That's already a drop of $600,000 under status quo, which is the battle we've been fighting. But if you look at scenario 1, because of, and I brought back the $179 per pupil in those future years. This isn't ultra conservative calculations or projections. But that revenue limit comes in at 126.2 compared to 128.7, a drop of nearly $3 million from what I think next year's will be. So our plan going forward, as I mentioned, is to conserve as many dollars as we possibly can, but rather than really focusing on the next 15 months, I really think we need to focus on the next 27 months. And I know we're very regimented in developing 12 months, 12-month financial picture, and then moving on to the next 12-month financial picture. But this time, I don't think that'll be the case. We're going to end this fiscal year with probably the biggest surplus we've had in a long time, if not ever. But you need to keep in mind when you see those financial statements of what we're looking forward to. And I know people will struggle with that because we grab onto that June 30 number and we hold on to it. And it's not that simple this time. So what we've done is, in terms of the development of next year's budget, we're continuing to assume current legislation. We've identified service reductions that are included in your packet to balance this year's budget. If a budget repair bill comes down and through federal stimulus and all that, we actually need more. My plan would be to utilize the fund balance that we're going to accrue this year and apply it. Otherwise, well, first of all, we've already issued contract to teachers, but I wouldn't feel right laying off staff that on the basis that something might happen and then it doesn't, or it comes in a different form. I also would recommend to the board. I've contacted the HR committee chair too to share this thought to get his input, that we hold off on any wage adjustments till or late summer, whenever more information becomes available. Not that we shouldn't give wage, that's not the point of holding off, but to make that decision now, before all these questions are answered, I think is premature, and the prudent thing to do. Again, ultimately, those wage adjustments are up to the board members and what those should be and the timing of that. So that's our plan. I listed off a bunch of questions, and I was kind of laughing at our earlier conversations about, what spikes in homeless and things that might change. I listed just things off the top of my head. What's our staffing look like? How many kids can we have on a bus with social distancing? What's the lunch hour look like? There's so many things out there now that I don't know that we can define anything very clearly right now. And that we just proceed with what is law, knowing that we'll use any reserves necessary to patch any hole that comes out of a budget repair bill, et cetera. I try to keep this as simple, and I have to say, with all this going on, it drives into the very core of all school financial issues, and I try to narrow it down to revenue limit, because that's the driver. So I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have based on our strategy.
Are there any questions? I guess the only question I have, Darren, is if we lose the per pupil increase in 2021, how does that happen? Doesn't the legislature have to, as part of the budget? Yeah, okay. Does the legislature would have to actually remove that out of the budget or pass a new budget? Or, I mean, it's law right now.
It's law right now, and they would override it in the budget repair bill.
Okay. Okay, I gotcha. So there
it would be Act 32 all over again. They did it in Act 32. They cut us by $550.
Okay.
So
they're going to do it. Yeah. Okay. I gotcha. So we don't have do we have an idea? I mean, I saw some numbers about that budget repair bill, and actually how much control the governor has over dispersal of those funds, which is pretty alarming because some of those funds are also attached to the colleges.
Yeah, the federal stimulus is not a K-12 pool of money.
Right.
It's all the way for as long as you want to be in college.
Yes.
And there's just no news coming out. We've gotten some estimates on what that number might be, a percentage of our Title I allocation, and we think that, Sherry, correct me if I'm wrong, I want to say it's like $1.2 million. But details or anything beyond that, I have not seen.
Okay.
Anything that I could base a decision on, certainly.
Okay. And then the other question I had is I read some stuff that the next biennial budget, like the 21-22, the starting point is the 2021 budget. So if the budget repair bill kills our per pupil increase, that the template for the next budget will not have it in there unless it's added, right?
I didn't factor that into this projection. I brought it back up to 179, but I'm establishing the new benchmark.
Okay.
That would be a bad scenario for a district like ours, where you're losing resident population pretty steadily.
Right. Okay. And then the only other concern that I have based on, and it goes back to the health insurance. There's a lot of preventative care that's not happening right now. I know that my wife just had a mammogram at the UW Madison Pro Healthcare place, and they usually do 700 a week, and now they're down to 300. Mm-hmm. So I mean, the health insurance concern for me is there's going to be something going undiagnosed for months, and then all of a sudden we have a spike in not just preventative care, but actual ailments that we have to cover, which is a concern that I'm having just by looking at the doctor's offices. I mean, Freighter laid off 50 nurses because they just don't have enough patients coming in.
Yeah.
Because a lot of that stuff, and it's not just the elective stuff. I mean, people are actually canceling their appointments because they don't want to go to the hospital or to the doctor's office.
Yeah, you have a complete slowdown now, and then the floodgates will open, and the ability to get appointments will even draw that out
Yeah.
further.
Right.
Yeah, in terms of, as Sherry mentioned, the IBNR and stuff, we have a call into our auditors to say you've got to make an exception to this because the claims are out there. History has shown us that.
Yeah, for sure. They're out there and they're probably going to be bigger. There'll be more to pay if it lasts, another month or whatever. Okay. Mr. Como.
Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, that's just another reason to continue to take a slower approach, if you wish. Wait for facts to come in, if we ever get facts. But as time goes on, we should have more information, and to just be very conservative when it comes to spending right now. So I like the approach, Darren, that you had detailed. We could probably come up with an additional 20 scenarios to all the other financial managers in your position. And again, we would be wrong 20 times. So I think we just need time, and we stay on top of the information as best as we can. And when we feel that we have some more facts to base decisions on, I'm sure you'll bring those to our attention for our considerations. So otherwise, the monies that we're going to save for the rest of this fiscal year, are you going to, they're part of Fund 10, the general, the fund balance, but are you going to have a special earmark for those too?
Yeah, that's one of the things we're holding off, or we've kind of identified a gross number, but we're also losing some revenues, and we have to develop what's that net number going to look like. There's some talk at the legislature about looking at districts' fund balances now. I can tell you I've been hearing that for 25 years, and they've never done anything because some districts have 0 and other districts are at 50%. So I don't think that's part of the strategy that we would see. But I do think if it's looking that way, we should look at how those dollars, reserves, are accounted for. We need to move them to be in a safer place through restricting it, or a transfer to Fund 46, or a lot of things, rather than it being used to balance the state's budget. So more to come on that. And this will be pretty much a standing agenda item every month now, because I think the information will always be updated every 4 weeks easily.
And again, time should reveal more details as we move on, because there will have to be some decisions made at both the federal and state level in the next few months. There will be some. So, but thank you, Darren. I appreciate your perspective and your approach on this.
Yeah, and the last thing is a couple of graphs under there for the scenarios that just shows you the change in the revenue limit over time. You look at the status quo; those are actual numbers up to this year. You can see our overall struggle has been flat revenue year to year, and that's not going away. It's just a matter of how much less authority we have. So take a look if you get a chance.
All right, any other questions for Darren?
I do.
Yes, sir.
First of all, echo Mr. Como's comments. It's become crystal clear. We just simply have to do that. We don't know what our revenue or income is going to be next year. And frankly, we don't know what our expenditures are going to be exactly. I guess looking at this in the worst case scenario, if both are down, we're going to have to likely look into cutting some expenditures. Have we begun looking into what we'd cut, besides teachers and facilities at the administration level? Lindholm building, stuff like that, keeping the teachers and those people who are boots on the ground out of it.
The list we were building pre-COVID, I guess, is included in your packet. Part of that list is always a review, and we do this every year, whether we have a shortfall or not, is going through and right-sizing staff. We're losing kids. So that's a natural part of it. It's on this list, but we would do it anyways. I think that's important for people to keep in mind. But we are also in a full review, and we've developed a list that we thought we needed to. Now we're looking at really a multi-year plan. And I can tell you there's nothing sacred at this point. It's the number of staff, or the number of programs we can offer, the number of buildings we operate. But the thing is, the benefit, if it falls out the way I've projected it, and again, this will be more wrong than right probably in the end. If we have a full year to plan well to head into that following year, whatever we do, I think we can do well under the circumstances.
Thank you.
Alrighty, any other questions? Alrighty. Thank you very much, Darren. Lots of work. The next item up is other business. Recommendations for future committee meetings. Does anybody have anything?
No.
I have, and I talked to Darren about it, related to maintenance. I received some information about some maintenance that was deferred. So I talked to Darren about where we are with the maintenance, if we're behind on maintenance, or so if you want to do something and have a discussion about it next meeting or a meeting after, just so we know where we are. Some of the stuff, and I sent Darren the information that I got. So I don't really know if it's a lack of funding or just a lack of ability to do the work.
We have 25 buildings that are 7 years old on average, so I'll tell you, there's never enough funding.
Right.
But for next month, I'm planning on having a full update on the referendum projects, because we are trying to move projects up now that we have full access to the buildings. And I was in them today, and I can tell you they're really moving. And we can tie that maintenance conversation. I can have Tim Williamson come and present on what we're doing. And where we're at, and we can give some history on this topic. So
That would be great. Anybody else have anything?
This is Sherry. I just wanted to say that question we had earlier about WiskNet that I was going to email you about, got the answer. So we do not have any other internet providers. WiskNet is our only internet provider.
Okay. Excellent. Okay. So we are in need of an executive session, correct?
yes.
Yes. Okay. So I would be looking for a motion to adjourn to executive session. Mr. Como.
I move to adjourn to executive session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 19.85, Parent 1, Parent E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. For bus contract, lease of district property, sale for Richardson, sale of district property, Blair, tax keys WAKC 1306230, WAKC 1306232, and Oakdale property, tax keys WAKC 1360198, WAKC 137700202, WAKC 1377003. And now I'll take a breath.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you. I guess it's a roll call.
Ms. White,
Aye.
Mr. Como,
Aye.
Ms. Reinacek. Mr. Matteo,
Aye.
and Mr. Como, or McCaffrey, sorry.
Aye.
All right.
All righty. We will see you there.
That's a separate meeting? to join into, is that correct?
Separate link.
And we don't have a need to go back into open session, correct, Patrick?
I don't think so.
Oh,
Well, that is correct. Can I end this meeting?
yep.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.